Hello and welcome to IOV Quick Tips. My name's Chris North and today I'm going to run through what you need to take into account when you're choosing a Lavalier microphone, both from a practical and a technical point of view. Now, you don't need to spend a fortune to get a decent Lavalier microphone, but you do need to know what to look out for, particularly at the cheaper end of the market. So let's first go through some of the main things that you ought to think about. First of all, you need to think about what you want to use your microphone for. Is it going to be for interviews on a shirt or a collar like this, or will it be for a singer where the sound will be much louder, or is it for an instrument, in which case you probably need a much wider frequency response? And are you going to use it inside or outside? All these things will dictate the specification that you need to look at when you're choosing a microphone. And I suppose one of the obvious things is, do you want to have an omnidirectional microphone that will record sound from all around, or a cardioid microphone which has a tighter pattern and will reject sound from the back, which is useful in a very noisy environment, but it is a little bit more difficult to place that and to keep it in place. If it goes out of position, then you lose the sound you want. Also, a cardioid microphone is a little bit more susceptible to wind noise if you have to use it outside. And I suppose the other thing is size. How big do you want it to be? Do you want it to be small like this microphone here so that it's unobtrusive on a coat or a dress? Or are you happy with something larger? If you were doing a news report, then certainly a larger microphone would probably be all right. And of course some microphones are actually minuscule in size so that you can barely see them. And then you'll need to look at the technical specifications to see what meets your particular requirements. So let's have a look at those now. Now, the first thing that most people consider is frequency range. That comes top of the table because we know about hi-fi, which has a frequency range to the ear of about 20 to 20,000 hertz. But for microphones, particularly Lavalier microphones, we don't really need that wide frequency band because we're concentrating on a particular sound very often. So for the voice, if you've got a microphone that will capture anything between 80 Hz and 18,000 Hz, you will capture anything that is likely to arise. In fact, for voice, you can go a lot less than that, and many microphones are tailored specifically for voice recording. But it's not really just a question of the width of the frequency band. More important is probably the frequency graph, because some frequencies will be recorded at a higher level than others and some at a lower level, and those things will shape the character of the sound of the particular microphone. So let's briefly have a look at a couple of graphs. The first one here is the COS11X, which has a presence boost at 6,000 Hz, where it's a full 6 dB more sensitive. And this second graph is the Primo 258 microphone capsule, which is what you're listening to now. Now, this microphone has a very flat frequency response from the bass right up to the high end, but it doesn't have a presence boost, so the voice is not given that extra boost and clarity that the other microphones show. Next, we want to look at sensitivity. Now, sensitivity is important because if you're recording speech in an interview like this in a quiet environment, you need a fairly sensitive microphone. If you're recording music and loud bands, then you'll need something that's much less sensitive, otherwise it will overload and possibly distort. Now, for speech, it's usually ideal to have a microphone with a sensitivity of anything between about -30 dB and -45 dB. This one is about -41. So that will capture most things in a normal environment and give you flexibility on your gain control. But probably more important than that, if you're recording loud sounds and bands and discos, is the actual sound pressure level that the microphone can take. So the maximum sound pressure level is the pressure that it can take from the sound before it distorts or cuts out. So you may need a sound pressure measurement of up to 130 dB if you're in a very noisy environment. But for most of us doing interviews, the sound pressure level is not really an issue. Now, one of my pet hates is hiss on microphones, and hiss depends on how much sound that the microphone circuits generate compared with the sound level of the noise or the sound you're trying to record. So a signal to noise ratio of 65 or 70 dB is pretty acceptable for most recordings, and at a professional level even this COS11X has a signal to noise ratio of only 66 dB. So anything above that will be fine. But these days you can actually get microphones that have a signal to noise ratio of 80 dB. The background noise that they create is totally inaudible. Now, you don't always have signal to noise ratios expressed in those terms. They're sometimes expressed as self noise, which is basically the same thing. You take the signal to noise ratio figure away from the standard reference figure of 94 dB, and what's left is the self noise. So 65 dB signal to noise ratio would be a self noise of 29 dB, and a 70 dB signal to noise ratio would have a self noise of 24 dB. So you just need to be aware of that when you're looking at specifications. Now, with Lavalier microphones, clothing noise is one of the big issues. If they're very sensitive to clothing noise movement, then that's going to be very evident in your recordings. Unfortunately, there's no actual measure of clothing noise that doesn't appear in the specification, so you just need to read the background information from the manufacturers and from reviews. Now, if you're using a Lavalier microphone outside, you need to be aware that they are generally very susceptible to wind noise. Some manufacturers do construct these Lavalier microphones with wind attenuation, but they tend to be quite expensive. So generally speaking, you would have to devise your own wind protection for an ordinary Lavalier microphone outside. And another thing that you need to think about is whether you want your microphone to have a powering unit so that it can be self-powered. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This is quite a large one from Audio-Technica. You can get circular barrel ones which contain a battery. This will run on a battery, an AA battery, or will run on phantom power from your mixer or camcorder. It outputs on a standard XLR jack and cable, but the input is on a small multi-pin connector. So in this case it's a mini XLR. Now, you don't normally want to run a long length of your very thin microphone cable from the microphone back to your camcorder or recorder. You're better to run a thicker XLR cable, and then you are less likely to have problems. And finally, I suppose quite a lot depends on cost, and how much you actually spend on a microphone will depend to a large extent on what you want to use it for, as well as your budget. Now, if you're going to use a microphone in a studio and it's going to be in a fairly protected environment, then yes, it's probably worth buying a more expensive microphone which will be more rugged and durable over time. But if you're taking a microphone out for some action, whether it's with children or sports people, then you really wouldn't want to have a microphone costing £350 or more attached to somebody who was leaping about. You could probably get a very acceptable sound from a much cheaper microphone, and it wouldn't then matter if it were damaged. So what's the difference between, say, a £30 microphone and a £300 microphone like the COS11? Well, basically, cheap microphones don't really live up to their specification very often, particularly the very cheap ones you get off the internet. It doesn't matter what the specification says, it probably isn't at all accurate. Now, you might not notice that too much in terms of frequency response, but you will notice it in terms of inherent noise, the poor signal to noise ratio, which will probably not be at all like the one quoted in the specification. Also, the cheaper ones will probably not be consistent, so if you buy two, they probably will not be the same in terms of noise or sensitivity. And they very often have poor shielding of the cable, so electrical interference from transformers or from digital phones will probably run the risk of spoiling your recording. And of course, the build quality won't be as good, so they're easily damaged. Well, I hope that you found these tips and suggestions useful. If you have, then let us know, and also tell us about anything you've found useful or problematic even when recording audio for video, so that we can pass this on to other people as well. If you're interested in joining the Institute of Videography, then have a look at our website, which is iov.uk, and do check back here for more tips about video filmmaking later. So, It's goodbye for now, and we'll see you again next time. Goodbye.